Okay, BBG, we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last talent talk of September. And I am so grateful to be here with you, BBG. This is going to be fantastic.
Well, what everybody doesn't know is that we've been talking for already 15 minutes. I was like, Sam, are you taping this? Come on.
I know. And so, like I said to BBG before we went live, this is the only talent talk I haven't keyed up some questions. We're just going to roll with it. And I just want to hear what you have to say. So our topic today is really around constraints to women that women face, right? Talk to us.
Specific though, it's constraints that women face, but it's constraints that women face to their visibility. And I'd really love to go back to the question you asked right before we went live, and you said, okay, we have 15 seconds left.
Yeah.
You know, around like what if we can't be visible? Like, what if we can't? Tell me that question again. I forget like how you phrased it. It was so somebody else telling your story for visibility.
We were actually talking about this book that's been written around the housekeeping that women have to do in corporate, right? Or being like, you know, housekeeping tasks that are thrown at women often. And you and I were discussing how, you know, you said that you didn't want to throw it back at like systemic issues, but how do we navigate this area?
Yeah.
Right?
So what I was saying about that is that the notion that there are systemic things, there are problems in organizations, that 100%. But ultimately the responsibility, and the responsibility is the wrong word, right? Like the power to move things, because I know that for a system to change, it's going to take years. Okay, it's coming back to me now. That's the story I wanted to tell you. For a system to change, it's going to take years. And if I have to sit on the sideline and wait for that system to change, how empowering is that? So I'm half Ethiopian, half Rwandese. And when I was a little girl, we lived in Kenya. And I can't remember when somebody asked me that question. I was a teenager at that point. And they said, you know, what's your dream? What would you like to see? And I remember saying, I would really love it if when I was a grown woman, when I spoke about Ethiopia, people didn't immediately get this like sad face and say to me, oh, how is it there right now? Like, how's the famine in Ethiopia, right? Because it was 85. I'm dating myself now, but it was right after 85. And so what people knew about Ethiopia was the famine and the We Are the World and all those pictures, etc. And so when I would speak about Ethiopia or say that I'm Ethiopian, that would be the reaction. And years later with Rwanda, it was the same thing. But what that is somebody telling a story for me, right? Yeah. Like I have to change the story of how I am perceived or how people, I'm the one to tell you what my story is. You're not the one to come to me and tell me that my story is a story of disempowerment that has been written and that you already know. And now you're going to ask me a question about it. I'm going to sit here in my disempowered state and tell you about that story. And so it's far away from women, but it's very much how I look at owning your story and being visible, not waiting.
About that, BBG. Like I've thrown some things at you yesterday, today, and you know, you've kind of turned it around and said, well, hang on, let me challenge you on some of these things. So, you know, you've been supporting women for a very long time in terms of your coaching, empowerment. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? Like, what are some of the things that you're hearing from women? How are women feeling right now?
So I can't speak to right now in general, but there are two opposing trends that I find really interesting. The women who approach me mainly from two spaces: what they see me post on LinkedIn or my podcast. So this is the two ways to which women find me. And so they are attracted to the material. They listen to it for a while. The usual pattern is they'll listen to it for a while, and afterwards they'll be like, you know what? This is someone that I want to work with, and then they'll approach me.
Right.
What that says is they realize the importance of visibility and of putting out a message, because my message is always around, I use visibility now. The Trojan horse word that I usually use is personal branding, because that is what is recognizable. But women will come with the recognition that it is something important. that putting your voice out there is something important that they want for themselves. So they'll knock at my door saying, I've listened to your content, I've read your content, I'm ça résonne, it resonates with me, and you know, what do you offer, basically?
Right.
That's one thing. Then when we start to work together, and this is something that happens at all levels, right? This was one of the most surprising things for me, and it's making me shift my practice a little bit, even for myself, is that the work of clarifying what they want to put out in the world and finding their zone of genius and like, what is it? Like, what is special about me? Which is the thing I enjoy doing the most. We get to that. It's not that hard. But then when we get to the part of, okay, now we're going to start putting ourselves out there. Let's craft a post for LinkedIn. Super simple. We've clarified the message. And this is not even like rah branding stuff. We've actually talked about you. We did like a deep dive into you. You felt the enthusiasm of being seen for who you are. And now we've gotten to the point of, let's put that post on LinkedIn, right? Like we talked about your voice, your tone, all of that. And I want you to imagine screeching brakes, right? You're driving, you're not focused. And then all of a sudden you look up and the person in front of you has stopped. It's a red light and you slam on your brakes.
Yeah.
That's what happens every time.
And what do you think that is?
So I asked myself that question a lot. And to be perfectly frank, at a certain point, I was like, est-ce moi le problème? Like, am I the one who like is having a hard time explaining how this works? And I was like, no, it's not. So that's my own imposter syndrome thing, right? Like we can talk about it. And I was like, that's not what it is. And what it is, it's not technical. Posting on LinkedIn, that's not what the issue is. The issue is, what are people going to think? The issue is my relationship to the word expertise, right? When I have to post something on LinkedIn and take a stand, my issue is if I have something to say that I can feel will ruffle some feathers, and I'm like, I know that's my message, but I'm not ready for that. How can I?
But not even ruffling feathers, right? To that point, you're making me think of some brilliant women that I know that I've said, they're consultants or they're, seasoned professionals, whatever it is. And I'm like, you really need to post something on LinkedIn, and I'm specifically thinking about some folks who have moved into the consulting space and they're like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, what do you mean? You've lived a rich career, so much experience, but to post even just a few sentences, to your point, I found that but who cares what I have to talk about, right? Who's going to care?
The ownership of the expertise and that who cares about what I have to say. And then there's like a whole narrative that comes with that, right? Who cares what I have to say? Ownership of the expertise. I don't believe in bragging. I'm someone who's humble. I am someone who I like to not be in the front of the picture. Like there's a whole narrative that comes as a wall between the ideas that I have that the world needs and my capacity to put them out there. And this is a judgment-free zone, right? Like I'm not here saying, oh, you should do it. I'm here saying, let's take note of the fact that those screeching brakes are so universal with so many women that something is going on, right?
And that's their voices. We're missing the richness of their voices on different platforms.
We are. I do this work because every time I have a discovery call with women, I'm a terrible salesperson, but my discovery calls are like my favorite moment because it's like a deep dive into the brilliance of this women. And I used to say, I'm careful about using those words, but I haven't found better words, is that I collect brilliant women. Because every time I have a conversation, whether it's a discovery call, and I've always thought that must be my zone of genius because I can see it. You and I have a conversation and I can I start to feel like a detective. I see that there's something and then we let's bring it out and let's talk about it. But that gap between seeing it and then feeling comfortable putting it out in the world, that's when I started to think about constraints. And I can see myself getting excited here. I realize how important this subject is to me. And the first time, Sam, I thought about constraints in that dans cette façon d'y penser, in that way of thinking about constraints is when Naomi Osaka came out and she needed space, and she set boundaries, and her setting of boundaries drove everyone nuts. Everybody was like, what? Are you kidding? And there was this outpour. And I remember thinking, having this visual in my head of women all over the world with a notepad, taking notes about what was allowed and what wasn't allowed, whether we know it or not. And then you have like Santa Marine, and then you have, our vice prime minister, and then you have AOC, and you have all of these women that we know are brilliant. We see them and we applaud them. And yet they get asked to smile more, asked to show up less, asked to be congenial, asked to take less space, asked to be less loud. All of these managing of who they are allowed to be. And we're in the background taking notes. This is allowed. This is not allowed. I do not have the energy for this level of risk. So thank you, but no, thank you.
Right.
Let's stop talking now.
No, I find this so fascinating. I should let everybody know, typically I go into these talent talks and I've got all these questions. And with you, it's, I just wanted this to flow because,
I have so much to say.
Fascinating. So if we take, your example of for the LinkedIn post and we move that over into a business setting, it makes me wonder, so are people actually using their voice, or these women actually using their voice around the boardroom table, right? Are they being silenced, or are they silencing themselves, right? Yeah. Thinking that nobody's going to care about what they have to say, or I don't know. Do you feel that there's a direct link into kind of the corporate world?
Everywhere. It's the corporate world. It's here on LinkedIn. It's in public speaking. It's in even in private settings, right? Like around the table, having dinner with family, and how you manage what you put out in the world and how you manage people's perception of risk, right? You know that if you raise your voice too much, it's going to make people uncomfortable. And so you'll sort of dial the volume to a level that you deem acceptable. And so I do presentations on imposter syndrome, and some of the stats on imposter syndrome are part of the reason why I wanted to do this work. So it's a gender neutral phenomenon, right? Like men, women, and there's that stat going around that 70% of people are going to feel this at some point. But the way that it shows up in men and women's lives is very different, and the intensity of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so there is and it's a bit far, but there are some stats from Claire Hossa. She's out of the UK, and she's been doing studies in organizations, which is really interesting because usually people will look at imposter syndrome at large, but she goes in organization and she does these studies. And what she realized is that around a given table, there will be, I think the number is 56% of people who will not speak up even though they know the answer. And when it's women, it goes up to 65%. So you're sitting there and you know, or you have this intuition that you know what needs to be said, and you're making the choice not to for a number of reasons. And I remember one client said, and it's really the best example. She said, I was in a meeting and someone said something, and I knew she was wrong. I had something to say, but I was like, she's more senior than me. She's been longer in the organization. She must know what she's talking about. And she made the choice not to speak up, right? So the filter is an internal filter. There's an internal conversation going on that filters, that filters what is going to come out or not come out, right? And then when it does come out, there's again that management of risk of the way that it comes out. So now we're going to couch the potential threat of what we're going to say with words like, I might be wrong, but blah, blah, blah. What do you think about blah, blah, blah? I'm sorry, this might be something stupid, but blah, blah, right? All of those words, one, they're managing our own risk, because if we've said something that we think doesn't have value, well, we've dimmed it down with all of the filler words that we put in front of it at the beginning, right? So we've lessened the risk of actually saying that thing, but we've also lessened the risk of us by making it more congenial, less conflictual. You know, somebody interrupts us and we laugh, and you know what I mean? Like we manage other people's risks, right? And so that is one of the way that not being visible shows up. We put a space between us and others.
Bibigi, I know that you had mentioned that you have 4 pillars, right, to these constraints. Can you walk us through those 4?
Yeah. So it's not so much 4 pillars as 4 things I was thinking about. I've been obsessing about this talk, the subject. I'm so passionate about it, but it's 4 things that came up. So one was technical knowledge. We talked about it, right? I don't know how to communicate effectively. I don't know how to post on LinkedIn, whatever. And that's the least difficult one to solve, right? The next one was fatigue. And the thing with fatigue is we just came out of a pandemic. In the last week, there is not a single woman, I kid you not, Sam, a single woman that I have spoken to who didn't have a sniffling kid sick at home, mine included. Not one.
It's flu season. Yeah.
Right. But what it means is what's behind the flu season and the sniffling kid at home is the lack of sleep.
Yes. For women.
Yes. That child has been up during the night. That child has been coughing, and we've been to the room. And for whoever listening, there is a bit of generalization in the sense of there are different realities. However, like I said, I spent a week talking to not one woman who hasn't lived this situation when you're. So anyway, so this kid doesn't let you sleep. You come in, you're fatigued. Now you spend your entire day back to back in meetings, but you know you still need to do your work. You do your work, and when you're done doing your work, you realize that you haven't signed that paper for the school outing the next day, and that you have completely forgotten that you were supposed to go get those shoes, and they're not allowed to go with, and all of that is going on. And now you go to bed, and you're like, oh shit, the school outing, we're not supposed to have peanuts in the bag, so you go and take them out.
And not to mention the sandwich generation as well, and women tending to their loved ones, oftentimes, right? Aging parents. And just being exhausted, whether you have children or not, because you're just exhausted.
Yeah. Right? And it's post-COVID, right? Like it's just
but even before COVID, I remember reading something that said one of the reasons why women don't get involved in mentoring as much as men do is because they have so much on their plate that they're like, mentor who and when? Like after a full day of work, and I call it the third shift at night, right? So for those of us who do have children, you have your first shift in the morning. Some of us even have like a pre-shift, right? Where you're trying to get some work done before the kids wake up. Then it's that shift, then it's your work shift. Then it's after that where you're preparing dinner and helping with homework. And then sometimes you're working again afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So where's the time to be mentoring, right? I just want to read something from Maria. So she had posted in the comments saying, and this is so great. I also find when it comes to sharing experience and mentoring, women are often approached to be offered mentoring as opposed to being asked to be mentors. It is assumed we need support in building our confidence rather than being seen as a SME. So interesting. What's your take on that?
It is, but that's this whole conversation, right, Sam? The whole conversation is about flipping the script.
Yeah.
We are being approached to be mentored, which means the person in front of you does not see you as ready for something. That is part of the problem. What you can do about the problem is saying, I really love the offer. That is wonderful. But I really feel ready at this point for this. Can we talk about what it would take for you to be confident that I am ready? Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, if the person is not confident that you are ready, it's also about setting your boundaries. And this was another one of, you had asked me for the 4 pillars, right? One of the pillars was believing ourselves, giving our voice, our internal voice and our internal knowing the same value as somebody else. This person who gives you mentoring has an opinion about you and your capacity. You accept that opinion through your actions, right? Or
Yeah.
you can say, I know that I'm ready. And so you can refuse the offer of that project that is under your capacity nicely, professionally. Say, you know what, this is an amazing project, but I feel like it might keep me in the same place I've been in for a while. And I'm really ready for another step. So can we talk about who could take this project and what it'll take to make you confident that I can take the next step? Believing your voice, the one that says, I'm ready, even if I'm scared to death about what that means.
But I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also you can be mentored, but then you can also mentor.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
Because there's different layers and levels. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, like pushing back and say it's the same thing when we're being offered a lateral role, right? Rather than our next promotion.
Right.
I
Right.
always wonder, I often see, how women in human resource, for example, a lot of times they're starting off as coordinators or HR administrators, and I haven't seen the same, I really haven't seen the same numbers of men in my network anyway, starting off in that support role. They seem to land as an advisor right off the bat, or a business partner, or right?
So you and I had this conversation yesterday, and I think we've talked about it before also. Again, the flipping of the script. Again,
Yeah.
if we look at that situation, women come in as coordinators, but men don't. Our energy is focused on what we're not receiving that somebody else is receiving, and we are assuming that that is the right way for things to happen. We talked about this with networking yesterday, right? We don't get opportunities because we can't go to the golf course. We can't go to the golf course because we're tending to the kids. And all of that is outwardly focused in terms of what we are not getting from the world. It's a conversation to be had. 100%. We started with that, right? Around like, how do we break the system? But what about flipping the script? What if it wasn't the golf course where we could find those opportunities, right? What if it was completely fine to start as coordinators?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not, but what if it was completely fine and that we could think as we can build for ourselves our own path and tell the story of how we're going to get from coordinator to where we want to be. Isabelle Hudon is a woman that I have very early on in my career. I looked at her with a lot of interest because I started out as an assistant, an administrative assistant. And it was something that weighed on me for a long time. It's something that played into imposter syndrome, and story for another day, but it was there. And as I was looking at Isabelle Hudon has built a story. And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, yeah, but she's a CEO now. Yes. But she started as a secretary and she built a path for herself where she's telling a story all along that path.
Yes.
Right? So does it matter what role we're starting with, or does it matter how we are crafting the story of why that role is perfectly fine? And here's what we're going to do for our next role, which is our choice when we're ready. Just even the story of that changes the way that we feel in our bodies and the way that we show up in the space, right?
So great. So technical, fatigue, the other constraint.
Believing ourselves. So the whole mindset thing, like believing your instinct. If somebody is saying you're not ready for something, you have two options. Oh, she said I'm not ready for it, so I'm not ready for it. Or, well, what if there was another explanation? She thinks I'm not ready for it. Curious to know why, right? Mm-hmm. So that piece, and then the relationship to expertise. So when somebody says to me as an expert, I swear to you, to this day, every single time, the feeling that I have is they're making fun of me. That's what I think, that they're saying that out of sarcasm. That's the relationship to expertise. That's the imposter syndrome. And I have that voice and I can see it and I know it now. I know what's going on. So I'm always fascinated by the fact that it happens every single time. Somebody says, it's not my expertise, you're the expert in this. And I'm like, they're saying this to make fun of me, aren't they? They're like giggling between themselves. It's still there.
Bibigi, I just had a light bulb moment. I'm telling you, every time I talk to you, you're amazing. So This is my therapy session. LinkedIn Live.
It's like half-hour conversation that we've been stringing for like 2 years.
For 2 weeks. You know, when you talked about, so what I'm getting out of this is really kind of our path, our choice. And, you know, you and I spoke about the fact that for a number of years, people were asking me like, why haven't you grown the business? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And my kids are 10 years apart, right? So you just made me think it was my choice. It was my choice that I wanted to spend my evenings home with my family versus going to networking events, or that's really not my thing, right? And so where I know that I've had male counterparts who have wined and dined and gone to the games and done all that kind of thing, and I've sat back going, I'm not doing that. Maybe I'm missing out in some way. But you know what? Like, I spent my energy and my time on the things that were of value to me. And I feel like now, yeah.
Not only that, Sam, you spend your time on the things that were important to you, and you still built a kick-ass business. Because the message is, why aren't you doing more and growing it and this and that? And like, even with the amount of time and the choices that I made, I did something that is pretty spectacular. That's my story, right?
Yeah.
I didn't need to do more.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get it. It's like, what, 26 minutes? I get it. I get you, BBG. I see you now. I see what you're doing.
That's my collection. I continue to collect spectacular women. Can I give you a last story?
Yes.
The idea here is centering. When I was 17 years old, I was in France, and I was dating a French guy, and he took me to his country home, to his mother's house with her partner. And him and his mother went to the market and left me with her partner. And he said to me, this was a French guy, and he said to me, so how does it feel to be different? I was 17 years old at the time. He said, so how does it feel to be different? And I remember that my 17-year-old self didn't understand the question. I was like, you're so weird. I'm not different. You're different. Yeah. Because my viewpoint, from my standpoint, he was different. Mm-hmm. He had centered himself and asked me to justify myself. And I'm talking, this is, 20 years later with my women's studies background, I'm analyzing it with words like centering. But at the time, all it was, I don't get it. I'm not different. You're different. You tell me, right? And that's the whole thing about telling your story. It's not easy. It's really scary, but you center yourself. Like, you are allowed to be right. You are allowed to like be in this space and say the things and raise your hand and say dumb things. You're allowed to. That's the way, like, we have ideas. So anyway.
What would be, we're coming to the last few minutes. What would be one piece of advice that you would give to women who are just, thinking, I want to be able to speak up. I want to, craft something different for myself.
Practice holding two realities at the same time.
Meaning?
I am scared. I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I know enough. I don't want to speak up. All the stuff that you need to work on, and the doing of the things. Don't believe that this that exists and that you need to care and tend to should inform reality. It's there, and it's important to take care of because it's your story and it's the things you need to heal. But it's not what should inform reality, because you do have the expertise. You do have the knowledge. You have been given the seat at the table. You are in the organization. You are a VP, a director, a manager. You have been tagged for a leadership role or not. It doesn't matter. But you're doing the things. So hold the two realities together, and don't think that you need to function from this reality. It's okay to function from this one. That's it.
You're amazing.
I love talking to you. I really do. And I can't see if there are people on LinkedIn or anything. It's just like our container. So this is feeling very safe for me.
It is safe. You're fantastic. So listen, BBG, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you so much. And I know you've got a podcast, and you're speaking, and you're coaching, and you're on LinkedIn. So Please.
Yes, the podcast is Speaking with Women. This week's episode is actually about our relationship to our time and taking back our agenda. So we talked about it. I really recommend women go check it out.
We will. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, BBG. Fantastic as always. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.